The deafening crack of a gunshot pierced the evening air as Tabitha Fletcher clutched her swollen belly, ducking behind an overturned wagon. She wasn't supposed to be in danger, not here, not now, not in her condition. But Deming, New Mexico territory, hadn't proven to be the safe haven she'd hoped for when she'd fled west 6 months ago. It was 1878, and the New Mexico territory remained as wild and unpredictable as the day she'd arrived. Another gunshot rang out, followed by shouting from the saloon across the dusty street. Tabitha caught her breath, feeling a sharp pain ripple across her abdomen. Not now, she prayed silently, not yet. "Madam, you all right?" A deep voice startled her from behind. Tabitha turned to see a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. The man's face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out broad shoulders and a concerned stance. "I'm fine," she lied, wincing as another pain gripped her, just waiting for the commotion to die down. The stranger stepped closer, and Tabitha could now see his face rugged, tanned by the sun, with kind eyes that contradicted the weathered appearance. He wore simple clothes, dusty from the trail, with a pistol holstered at his hip. "Name's Thomas Everett. Most folks call me Tom." He extended a hand to help her up. "And you don't look fine, if you don't mind me saying." Tabitha hesitated before accepting his help. "Tabitha Fletcher." As she stood, another contraction seized her, stronger than before. She gasped, nearly doubling over. "You need a doctor," Thomas said firmly, no question in his voice. Without waiting for her approval, he swept her into his arms. "The doctor's office is that way," she managed between labored breaths, pointing down the street. "But I can't." She bit back the rest of her sentence, embarrassed to admit her financial situation to a stranger. Thomas carried her effortlessly through the town, ignoring the curious glances from passers-by. Tabitha was acutely aware of the strong arms holding her, the steady heartbeat against her cheek. It had been a long time since anyone had shown her such simple kindness. Dr. Wilson's office sat at the edge of town, a modest wooden building with a sign that had seen better days. Thomas kicked at the door with his boot, his arm still full with Tabitha. The door swung open to reveal a bespectacled man in his 50s, his sleeves rolled up and suspenders holding up wrinkled trousers. "What's this, then?" Dr. Wilson asked, his eyes quickly assessing Tabitha's condition. "Lady's about to have a baby," Thomas stated plainly. "Needs help." Dr. Wilson stepped aside. "Bring her in. Put her on the table in the back room." Thomas carried Tabitha through to the examination room and gently laid her on the table. He started to step away, but she caught his hand, surprising herself with the gesture. "Thank you," she whispered. "But I should tell you, you rest now," he interrupted. "I'll be waiting outside." The next hours passed in a blur of pain for Tabitha. Dr. Wilson was efficient and kind, coaching her through the contractions as they grew more intense. By midnight, her son entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the small room and Tabitha's heart with equal measure. "A healthy boy," Dr. Wilson announced, placing the swaddled infant in her arms. "Strong lungs on this one." Tabitha gazed down at her son's red face, already seeing traces of herself in his tiny features and, thankfully, none of his father. "Hello, Samuel," she whispered, the name she'd chosen months ago finally belonging to someone real. The doctor busied himself with cleaning up, then cleared his throat. "Now, Mrs. Fletcher, about my fee, I'm Miss Fletcher," she corrected quietly, not taking her eyes off Samuel. "And about your fee, I don't have much money." She finally looked up at him. "I can work to pay it off. I'm good with numbers and I can cook and clean." Dr. Wilson's face hardened slightly. "I understand your situation, Miss Fletcher, but I have my own family to feed. My fee is $15. Tabitha's heart sank. She had less than $3 to her name, hidden in the lining of her dress. "I don't suppose you'd accept payments over time. I've tried that arrangement before. Never works out." Dr. Wilson sighed. "I can't run a charity, especially not with the new medical supplies I've ordered from back east." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Thomas Everett's head appeared in the doorway, his hat now in his hands. "Everything all right in here?" Dr. Wilson looked relieved to see him. "Mr. Everett, perhaps you're this young lady's husband?" "No, sir," Thomas replied, stepping fully into the room. His eyes fell on the baby in Tabitha's arms, and his expression softened. "Just a concerned citizen." "Well, concerned citizen, Miss Fletcher here is unable to pay for her medical care." Thomas's gaze moved from the doctor to Tabitha, who felt heat rise to her cheeks. The shame of her situation burned worse than the physical pain she just endured. "How much?" Thomas asked simply. $15, Dr. Wilson replied. Thomas nodded once, then turned to leave. "Wait," Tabitha called after him. "You don't have to," but he was already gone, the door swinging shut behind him. Tabitha closed her eyes, the weight of her situation pressing down harder than ever. She'd come west to escape the scandal back in Boston, to give her child a chance at a life unshadowed by gossip and judgment. Now she was penniless, alone, and in debt to a doctor in a town where she barely knew a soul. 10 minutes later, the door opened again, and Thomas returned, accompanied by the sound of hooves outside. He approached Dr. Wilson and spoke in a low voice. The doctor stepped to the window, looked out, and nodded in satisfaction. "Miss Fletcher," Dr. Wilson said, turning back to her, "it seems your bill has been settled." Tabitha looked at Thomas in confusion. "What did you do?" "Storms outside," Thomas said, gesturing vaguely toward the window. "My horse, best quarter horse in 3 territories. Dr. Wilson's agreed to accept him as payment." Tabitha's mouth fell open. "Your horse? But why would you? That's a mighty fine animal, Miss Fletcher," Dr. Wilson interrupted, clearly pleased with the arrangement. "Worth considerably more than $15, I might add." "Then give her the difference," Thomas said firmly. "She'll need it for the baby." Dr. Wilson's smile faltered slightly, but he nodded. "Fair enough. I'll return with $10 then." When the doctor left the room, Tabitha stared at Thomas, unable to comprehend what had just happened. "I don't understand. Why would you give up your horse for me? You don't even know me." Thomas shifted uncomfortably, looking everywhere but at her. "My pa taught me that when someone needs help, you help them. Simple as that." He finally met her eyes. "Besides, seems like you and the little one there could use a friend." "A friend costs more than $25 where I come from," Tabitha said softly. A small smile lifted the corner of Thomas's mouth. "Well, this ain't where you come from, Miss Fletcher. This is Deming, New Mexico territory, and things work a bit different out here." Dr. Wilson returned with the money, which Thomas promptly handed to Tabitha. She accepted it with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she whispered, fighting back tears. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "No need," Thomas assured her. "Just focus on getting strong again, for him." He nodded toward baby Samuel. Dr. Wilson informed Tabitha that she could stay the night in the examination room, and he would check on her in the morning. Thomas promised to return with some supplies for her and the baby, ignoring her protests. Alone with her son later that evening, Tabitha wondered at the strange turn her life had taken. She had come west to escape one man's cruelty, only to encounter another man's unexpected kindness. As Samuel slept peacefully against her chest, she found herself thinking of Thomas Everett's kind eyes and quiet strength. She had sworn never to depend on a man again, but perhaps, just perhaps, there were still good men in the world. True to his word, Thomas returned the next morning with a basket containing baby clothes, diapers, and food. Dr. Wilson examined Tabitha and Samuel, declaring both healthy enough to leave. "Where will you go?" Thomas asked as he helped gather her meager belongings. Tabitha hesitated. She had been staying at the boarding house, but her paid time there had expired yesterday. With the money Thomas had given her, she could afford another week, maybe 2 if she was careful. "I have a room at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house," she said. "I should get back there." Thomas nodded. "I'll walk you." The early morning sun cast long shadows as they made their way through town, Thomas carrying the basket of supplies while Tabitha held Samuel close. The town was just beginning to stir, shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks, the blacksmith stoking his forge for the day's work. Mrs. Holloway, a stout woman with a perpetual scowl, met them at the door of the boarding house. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of the baby. "Miss Fletcher, you never mentioned anything about a child." Tabitha straightened her shoulders. "I'm prepared to pay extra, Mrs. Holloway." The landlady sniffed. "This is a respectable establishment. We don't accommodate women in your situation." Thomas stepped forward. "Mrs. Holloway, Miss Fletcher here is a lady who's fallen on hard times. Surely you're Christian Charity. Don't you preach to me about charity, Thomas Everett," Mrs. Holloway snapped. "I know your kind drifting from town to town, living off the land and your wits. What business do you have escorting unwed mothers around Deming?" Thomas's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Tabitha spoke up. "I'm a widow, Mrs. Holloway," she lied smoothly. "My husband died on our journey west. These are my wedding things." She touched the small bag containing her belongings, the few treasured items she'd managed to bring from her old life. Mrs. Holloway's expression softened slightly, but she shook her head. "Even so, I don't allow children. Too noisy. Disturbs my other boarders." Tabitha bit her lip, fighting back tears of frustration. "Where would she go now?" "I understand," she said stiffly. "I'll collect my things and be gone within the hour." Thomas touched her elbow gently. "I have a proposition if you'll hear it." Both women looked at him expectantly. "I have a small ranch about 3 miles outside of town. Nothing fancy, but there's a cabin with 2 rooms. You and the boy could stay there while you figure out your next steps." "Absolutely not," Tabitha said immediately. "I couldn't impose. I'm not offering charity, Miss Fletcher," Thomas interrupted. "I could use some help around the place. Cooking, maybe keeping accounts, in exchange for room and board." Tabitha studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or ulterior motives. She found none, only the same quiet kindness she'd seen yesterday. "What about your horse?" she asked. "The one you gave to Dr. Wilson." A shadow passed over Thomas's face. "Storm was special, but I have others. Not as fine, but they'll do." Mrs. Holloway harumphed. "Sounds improper to me. A single woman living at a bachelor's ranch." Thomas turned to her. "Mrs. Holloway, would you be willing to pack up Miss Fletcher's belongings and have them sent out to my place later today? I'll pay for the service." The landlady's disapproval melted at the mention of payment. "I suppose I could arrange that." Tabitha looked down at Samuel, then back at Thomas. What choice did she have? The money wouldn't last long in a hotel, and no other boarding house in town would likely take her with an infant. "I accept your offer, Mr. Everett," she said finally, "but only until I can find more suitable arrangements." Thomas nodded, the hint of a smile touching his lips. "Fair enough. My wagon's at the livery. I'll fetch it and be back shortly." The ride to Thomas's ranch was quiet, broken only by Samuel's occasional cries and the creaking of the wagon wheels. Tabitha sat stiffly beside Thomas, still uncertain if she'd made the right decision. The landscape stretched out around them, vast and open, dotted with sagebrush and yucca. Mountains rose in the distance, purple shadows against the bright blue sky. "It's beautiful out here," she said, breaking the silence. Thomas nodded. That's why I stayed. Came out here after the war looking for somewhere quiet, found this piece of land and knew it was home. You fought in the war? Tabitha asked, glancing at him. He didn't look old enough to have fought in the Civil War, but then again, many had lied about their age to enlist. Tail end of it, he confirmed. Joined up in '64 when I was 16, saw enough to last me a lifetime. He fell silent again, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Tabitha didn't press him. She understood the desire to leave the past unspoken. The ranch came into view as they crested a small rise, a modest cabin with a barn and corral nearby. A small herd of cattle grazed in a pasture to the east. It wasn't grand, but it was well maintained, with a vegetable garden to one side and a few chickens scratching in the dirt. It's not much, Thomas said as he drew the wagon to a halt, but it's peaceful. Tabitha felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of safety. It's lovely, she said honestly. Thomas helped her down from the wagon, careful not to disturb the sleeping Samuel. He led her to the cabin, opening the door to reveal a simple but clean interior. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a wooden table and chairs nearby. A small kitchen area occupied one corner. My room's through there, Thomas said, gesturing to a door on the right. You and the boy can have the room on the left. There's a washroom out back, and the pump for water is just outside the kitchen window. Tabitha walked to the door on the left and peered in. The room was sparsely furnished with a bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a basin and pitcher. A window looked out over the garden. Thank you, she said, turning back to Thomas. This is more than generous. He shrugged, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. I'll get your things settled, then show you around the place. You must be tired after everything. Tabitha nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she truly was. The birth, the stress of not knowing where she would go, the wagon ride, it all caught up with her at once. I think I'll rest for a bit if that's all right. Of course, there's fresh water in the pitcher and I'll bring in some food later. He turned to leave, then paused. Miss Fletcher? Yes. Welcome to my home. With that, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Tabitha sat carefully on the edge of the bed, cradling Samuel against her chest. For the first time since she'd discovered she was carrying a child, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps things might turn out all right after all. The next few days established a tentative rhythm. Tabitha recovered her strength quickly, determined to earn her keep. She took over the cooking, surprised to discover that Thomas had been surviving on a diet of beans, bacon, and hardtack. The garden provided fresh vegetables, and the chickens supplied eggs. Thomas showed her where he kept his accounts, a haphazard collection of receipts and notes that made Tabitha's organized mind itch to bring order. For his part, Thomas kept a respectful distance, working with his small herd of cattle during the day and often retiring early in the evening. He was unfailingly polite but revealed little about himself beyond the basics: that he'd come west after the war, worked on several ranches before saving enough to buy this place 5 years ago, and now ran about 40 head of cattle with occasional help from a local ranch hand named Pedro. A week after their arrival, Tabitha was hanging laundry on the line when she heard hoofbeats approaching. A stranger rode into the yard, a lean man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. "Morning, madam," he called, tipping his hat. "Is Tom around?" Before she could answer, Thomas emerged from the barn. "Sheriff Davis, what brings you out this way?" The sheriff dismounted, eyeing Tabitha curiously before turning to Thomas. "Got word about some cattle rustling over at the Henderson place. Thought you should know, keep an eye out." "Obliged for the warning," Thomas replied. "This is Miss Fletcher. She's helping out around the place for a while." Sheriff Davis nodded politely. "Madam, Heard about your situation from Dr. Wilson. Town's mighty curious about you." Tabitha stiffened. "I'm sure they have more important matters to discuss." A smile twitched at the sheriff's mouth. "You'd be surprised what counts as entertainment in a town like Deming." He turned back to Thomas. "Also came to tell you that Storm's doing well. Doc's mighty pleased with him." Something flickered across Thomas's face, a brief shadow of loss quickly masked. "Good to hear." The sheriff lowered his voice, but Tabitha could still hear him. "You gave up a fine horse there, Tom. What were you thinking?" Thomas glanced at Tabitha, then back at the sheriff. "Seemed like the right thing to do at the time." Sheriff Davis shook his head. "Always were soft-hearted, just didn't expect you to show it over a—" He stopped abruptly, seeming to remember Tabitha's presence. "A what, Sheriff?" Tabitha asked coolly. "A fallen woman, an unwed mother." "I assure you, I've heard worse." The sheriff had the grace to look embarrassed. "No offense meant, madam. It's just that Tom here doesn't usually involve himself in other folks' business." "Perhaps I'm evolving," Thomas said dryly. "Will you stay for coffee, Sheriff?" "Can't. Need to make rounds to the other ranches." He mounted his horse again. "You two take care now. And Tom," he hesitated, "people talk. You know how it is." After the sheriff departed, an awkward silence fell between Tabitha and Thomas. "I'm causing problems for you," she said finally. "The town thinks—" "I don't much care what the town thinks," Thomas interrupted. "Never have. But your reputation is my own concern." He softened his tone. "Miss Fletcher, you and Samuel are welcome here for as long as you need. The rest is just noise." Tabitha studied him, this man who had given up his prized horse for a stranger, who had opened his home without question. "Why are you doing all this?" Thomas looked away, his gaze settling on the distant mountains. "My mother was in a situation not unlike yours once. Nobody helped her." The simple statement contained volumes of unspoken pain. "I swore I'd never pass by someone who needed help the way folks passed by her." "What happened to her?" Tabitha asked gently. "Died when I was 8. Worked herself to death trying to provide for me." He looked back at her, his eyes holding hers steadily. "So you see, Miss Fletcher, this isn't about charity. It's about doing what I wish someone had done for my mother." The honesty of his answer touched something deep within Tabitha. She'd built walls around herself after William Blackburn had left her pregnant and alone, swearing never to trust a man again. Yet here was Thomas Everett, challenging her resolve with nothing more than simple decency. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "And please call me Tabitha." A small smile touched his lips. "Tabitha it is, then, and I'm Tom to most folks." "Tom," she repeated, testing the name. Their gazes held for a moment longer than necessary before Thomas cleared his throat. "I should get back to work. The north fence needs mending." As he walked away, Tabitha realized her heart was beating faster than normal. She told herself it was nothing, just gratitude mixed with the lingering weakness from childbirth. It certainly wasn't attraction. She couldn't afford such feelings, not now, maybe not ever again. That evening, as they sat at the table sharing a meal of rabbit stew that Tabitha had prepared, Samuel began to fuss in the cradle Thomas had fashioned from an old wooden box. "I'm sorry," Tabitha said, rising to soothe him. "He's usually better in the evenings." "No need to apologize," Thomas replied. "Babies cry, it's what they do." Tabitha picked up Samuel, rocking him gently. To her surprise, Thomas stood and held out his arms. "May I?" Hesitantly, Tabitha passed Samuel to him. Thomas cradled the infant with surprising ease, one large finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. "Hello there, young man," he murmured. "What's all the fuss about, eh?" To Tabitha's amazement, Samuel quieted almost immediately, his tiny fist wrapping around Thomas's finger. "You've got away with him," she said, astonished. Thomas smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face. Had some practice. My sister has 4 little ones back in Texas. You never mentioned a sister. Don't talk much about family, we're not close anymore. Tabitha wanted to ask why, but sensed it wasn't the right time. Instead, she watched as Thomas gently rocked Samuel, humming a tune she didn't recognize. The scene stirred something in her, a dangerous yearning for things she'd convinced herself she didn't want or need. Later that night, unable to sleep, Tabitha sat by her window watching the moon cast silver light across the land. She thought about William Blackburn, the charming banker's son who had wooed her with pretty words and promises of marriage, only to abandon her when she told him about the baby. She thought about her parents, who had disowned her rather than weather the scandal. And she thought about Thomas Everett, who had given up his prized horse for a woman he didn't know, who had opened his home to her and her illegitimate child without judgment. It would be so easy to fall for a man like Thomas. Too easy. And too dangerous. She had Samuel to think of now, and she couldn't risk their security on feelings that might not be reciprocated, or worse, might be false like William's had been. No, she decided. She would remain grateful but guarded. She would work hard, save what money she could, and eventually move on to build a life for herself and Samuel elsewhere. That was the sensible plan, the safe plan. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, it was Thomas's smile she saw in her mind's eye, and the way he had looked holding her son as if the baby were his own. The weeks passed, and spring bloomed across the ranch. Tabitha fell into a comfortable routine, caring for Samuel, keeping the house, and gradually bringing order to Thomas's chaotic accounts. She discovered she had a talent for cooking with limited ingredients, creating meals that made Thomas's eyes light up with appreciation. In the evenings, they would sometimes sit on the porch, watching the sunset while Samuel slept inside. These quiet moments became precious to Tabitha, a time when Thomas would occasionally share stories from his past riding with a cattle drive from Texas, his brief stint as a deputy in a town further north, the time he'd narrowly escaped a flash flood while camping in the mountains. He never spoke of the war or his family beyond brief mentions, and Tabitha didn't press him. She understood boundaries. For her part, Tabitha shared edited versions of her own past growing up in Boston, her love of books, her dream of perhaps becoming a teacher someday. She didn't mention William or the circumstances of Samuel's conception. If Thomas wondered about Samuel's father, he never asked. One evening in early May, Thomas returned from town with supplies and an unexpected gift, a small book of poetry. "Saw this at the general store," he said, handing it to Tabitha almost shyly. "Remembered you saying how much you missed reading." Tabitha ran her fingers over the leather binding, deeply touched by the thoughtful gesture. "Thank you. It's been so long since I've had a new book." That night, after Samuel was asleep, they sat by the fire while Tabitha read aloud from the volume poems by Wordsworth and Keats, Byron and Shelley. Thomas listened intently, his eyes often closed as if better to absorb the words. "You read beautifully," he said when she paused. "Like you understand every word down to its bones." "Poetry was my escape as a girl," she admitted. "When the world seemed too confining, poems took me elsewhere." Thomas nodded. "That's how I feel about this land. When everything else closes in, I can look at those mountains and breathe again." Their eyes met across the small space between their chairs, and Tabitha felt a jolt of connection so strong it frightened her. She quickly looked down at the book. "It's getting late," she said, closing the volume. "I should check on Samuel." Thomas didn't try to stop her, but as she left the room, she felt his gaze follow her, warm and steady as the fire's glow. The next day, Pedro arrived to help Thomas move the cattle to higher pasture for the summer. He would be staying for several days, sleeping in the barn. Tabitha had met him briefly before, a quiet man in his 40s who spoke little English but was unfailingly polite. With Pedro's presence, a subtle tension entered the household. Thomas seemed more reserved, and the easy conversations of recent evenings disappeared. Tabitha told herself it was natural a man wouldn't want to appear soft in front of another man, but she missed their talks. On the second day of Pedro's visit, Tabitha was hanging laundry when she heard angry voices from the corral. She looked up to see Thomas and Pedro engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument, though she couldn't make out the words at that distance. Later, when Thomas came in for the midday meal, she asked if everything was all right. "Fine," he said shortly. "Just a disagreement about the best way to handle the young bulls." But there was something in his manner that suggested it was more than that. Thomas was a patient man, not given to anger. Whatever had passed between him and Pedro had disturbed him deeply. That evening, after Pedro had gone to the barn and Samuel was asleep, Tabitha found Thomas sitting alone on the porch, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He rarely drank, and never more than one small glass. "May I join you?" she asked hesitantly. He nodded, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. They sat in silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Pedro thinks I should ask you to leave," Thomas said suddenly. Tabitha felt as if she'd been struck. "Oh, he says people in town are talking, that it's not right you being here. That it's bad for my reputation. I see." Tabitha's voice was small. "Perhaps he's right. We've imposed on your generosity for too long." Thomas turned to her, his expression fierce in the fading light. "Is that what you think? That you're an imposition?" "I don't know what to think anymore," she admitted. "I'm grateful for everything you've done, but I never meant to cause problems for you. You haven't." He set down his glass with a decisive motion. "Pedro means well, but he doesn't understand, and neither does the town." "Understand what?" Thomas looked away, his profile strong against the night sky. "That I've never felt more at peace than these past weeks. That having you and Samuel here has made this place feel like a real home for the first time." Tabitha's heart stuttered in her chest. "Thomas, I know you have plans," he continued quickly. "That you mean to move on, make your own way, and I respect that. But I want you to know that you're welcome here for as long as you want to stay, both of you." The unspoken words hung in the air between them, the possibility of something more permanent, more profound. "I don't know what to say," Tabitha whispered. "You don't have to say anything." Thomas stood, picking up his glass. "Just know that Pedro's opinion doesn't change mine." He went inside, leaving Tabitha alone with her tumultuous thoughts. She had been so careful to guard her heart, to remind herself that her stay at the ranch was temporary. But somewhere along the way, she had begun to imagine a different future, one where she and Samuel remained, where the small ranch became their home, where she and Thomas built something together. It was a dangerous dream, one that left her vulnerable. And yet, as she gazed up at the stars scattered across the vast New Mexico sky, Tabitha couldn't help but wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, it might be a dream worth the risk. The next morning, Thomas and Pedro left early to move the cattle. They would be gone most of the day, giving Tabitha time to think. As she went about her chores, she found herself taking stock of her life, where she had been, where she was now, and where she might go next. Boston seemed a lifetime away. The society girl she had been, with her fancy dresses and music lessons, barely felt like the same person. That Tabitha had been naive, sheltered, easily deceived by William's charm. This Tabitha was stronger, tempered by hardship and the miracle of bringing a life into the world. As she rocked Samuel for his midday nap, Tabitha wondered what kind of life she wanted for him. A city would offer more opportunities for education, for advancement. But there was something to be said for growing up with open skies and honest work, with a man like Thomas as an example. If she stayed, if Thomas truly wanted them to. The sound of approaching horses interrupted her thoughts. Too early for Thomas and Pedro to be returning. Tabitha laid Samuel in his cradle and went to the window. 3 men on horseback were riding into the yard, none of them familiar. Tabitha hesitated, then stepped onto the porch. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The lead rider, a thin man with a pockmarked face, smiled unpleasantly. "Well now, what do we have here?" "Tom Everett keeping secrets." "Mr. Everett isn't here at present," Tabitha said coolly. "He's out with the cattle." "Convenient," said the second man, heavyset with a bushy beard. "Mighty convenient." The third man remained silent, his eyes moving from Tabitha to the cabin and back, assessing. "If you'd like to leave a message, I'll tell him you called," Tabitha said, fighting to keep her voice steady. The pockmarked man dismounted, his movements lazy but purposeful. "No message. We'll wait." Alarm bells rang in Tabitha's mind. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. Mr. Everett won't return until evening. Then we'll have a nice long visit, won't we?" The man stepped onto the porch, too close for comfort. "You his wife. Don't recall Tom mentioning a wife." "I'm a friend," Tabitha said firmly, "and I must ask you to leave." The man chuckled, looking back at his companions. "Hear that, boys? The friend wants us to leave." He turned back to Tabitha, his expression hardening. "We've got business with Everett, something about some cattle that went missing from our employer's herd. If you're suggesting Mr. Everett stole cattle, not suggesting anything, madam, just here to have a conversation." He made a show of looking around. Nice little place, shame if anything happened to it. The threat was unmistakable. Tabitha thought quickly. Samuel was inside, still sleeping. She had no weapon, and even if she did, she was outnumbered. Her best hope was to keep them talking until Thomas returned. "Perhaps I can offer you gentlemen some coffee while you wait," she said, forcing a smile. "It's a long ride back to town." The pockmarked man seemed surprised by the offer, then shrugged. "Sure, why not? Boys, tie up the horses. Looks like we're having coffee with the lady." Tabitha led them inside, her mind racing. The coffee would buy her some time, but what then? As she moved about the kitchen, she kept a careful eye on the men who had spread out in the small main room. The bearded man examined Thomas's rifle, which hung over the fireplace, while the silent one looked through papers on the small desk in the corner. "What's your name, madam?" the pockmarked man asked, sitting at the table. "Miss Fletcher," Tabitha replied, deliberately omitting her first name. "Miss staying with a single man. Folks in town must have plenty to say about that." Tabitha didn't respond, focusing on measuring coffee grounds into the pot. "I'm Curtis," the man continued. "That's Barton with the beard, and the quiet one is Mills. We work for Mr. James Radcliffe." "Name mean anything to you?" Tabitha shook her head, though she'd heard Thomas mention Radcliffe before, a wealthy rancher who owned most of the water rights in the area and was buying up smaller ranches when he could. "Mr. Radcliffe's missing some prime breeding stock," Curtis said. "Funny thing is, one of his hands saw cattle with his brand up near Everett's north pasture last week." "That's impossible," Tabitha said firmly. "Mr. Everett is an honest man." Curtis smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "All men have their price, Miss Fletcher. Even honest ones." A soft cry came from the bedroom, Samuel awakening from his nap. Tabitha's heart jumped to her throat. "Well now, what's that?" Curtis stood, moving toward the sound. "You hiding something else in there, my son," Tabitha said quickly, stepping between him and the bedroom door. "He's just a baby, not even 2 months old." Curtis raised an eyebrow. "A baby? Everett's?" "No. As I said, I'm a friend. Mr. Everett was kind enough to offer us shelter when we had nowhere else to go." Curtis studied her face, then laughed. St. Thomas taking in strays. That explains a few things. Samuel's cries grew louder. Tabitha's maternal instinct warred with her fear of leaving the men unattended. Go on, Curtis said, gesturing toward the bedroom. Tend to your boy. We'll behave ourselves. Tabitha hesitated, then hurried to get Samuel. She changed him quickly, all the while straining to hear what the men might be doing in the other room. When she returned, Samuel cradled against her shoulder. She found Curtis examining the book of poetry Thomas had given her. Didn't take Tom Everett for the poetic type, he commented, flipping through the pages carelessly. Please be careful with that, Tabitha said. It was a gift. Curtis closed the book with a snap. A gift, huh? Everett's sweet on you, Miss Fletcher. Before she could answer, the sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention. Curtis moved to the window. Boss is back earlier than you expected, he said, turning to Tabitha with a smile that sent chills down her spine. Now we can have that conversation. Thomas entered the cabin first, stopping short at the sight of the three strangers. His eyes immediately sought Tabitha, concern evident in his expression. Curtis, he said flatly. What brings Radcliffe's men to my home? Pedro appeared behind him, his hand hovering near the knife at his belt. Just a friendly visit, Curtis replied. Getting acquainted with your house guests. Thomas's jaw tightened. Miss Fletcher and her son are under my protection. If you frighten them, no need for threats, Everett. We've been perfect gentlemen, haven't we, Miss Fletcher? Tabitha nodded stiffly, bouncing Samuel gently as he fussed. State your business and leave, Thomas said, his voice hard. Curtis's friendly demeanor dropped away. Some of Mr. Radcliffe's cattle have gone missing. Cattle with his brand were spotted near your property. I don't steal cattle, Thomas said. Never have, never will. If Radcliffe's missing stock, he should look elsewhere. See, that's just it, Curtis continued. Mr. Radcliffe thinks you might be holding a grudge. After all, you did try to stop him from damming up Willow Creek last year, a dam that would have benefited your land as well as his. That dam would have cut off water to 3 other small ranches, Thomas replied. It wasn't right. Curtis shrugged. Right, wrong doesn't matter now. What matters is that Mr. Radcliffe wants his cattle back, all 20 head. I don't have his cattle. Then you won't mind if we take a look around your property. Curtis smiled. Just to be sure. Thomas hesitated, and Tabitha could see him calculating the odds. 3 of Radcliffe's men against himself and Pedro. Not good odds if it came to violence. Fine, Thomas said finally. Look all you want. You won't find what isn't there. Wise decision, Curtis said, standing. Boys, let's take a ride around the place. Miss Fletcher, sorry for disturbing your afternoon. After the men left, accompanied by Thomas and Pedro, Tabitha sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. Samuel had quieted, soothed by her constant motion during the confrontation. It's all right, she whispered to him. Everything's going to be all right. But she wasn't sure she believed it. The look in Curtis's eyes had been calculating, predatory. This wasn't just about missing cattle, this was about something deeper, a conflict between Thomas and Radcliffe that she didn't fully understand. Thomas returned an hour later alone. His expression was grim. Where's Pedro? Tabitha asked, following them to make sure they actually leave our land. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd come to recognize. I'm sorry you had to deal with them, Tabitha. Are you and Samuel all right? We're fine, she assured him. Thomas, what's really happening? This isn't just about cattle, is it? He sighed heavily, dropping into a chair. No, Radcliffe wants my land, specifically the spring on the north end. It feeds into the creek that runs through both our properties. If he controls my spring, he controls water for half the small ranchers in the area. And the missing cattle, a pretense. I'd stake my life there are no missing cattle, but it's an excuse to cause trouble to pressure me." He looked up at her, his eyes troubled. "This is going to get worse before it gets better, Tabitha. Maybe you and Samuel should go to town for a while, stay at the hotel." "No," Tabitha said firmly, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "This is our home too now. I won't be driven away by threats." Something flickered in Thomas's eyes, hope, perhaps, or gratitude. "Our home," he repeated softly. Tabitha felt heat rise to her cheeks, realizing the implications of what she'd said. "I know what you mean," Thomas interrupted gently. "And I'm glad to hear it." Their gazes held, and in that moment, Tabitha felt a shift between them, a barrier falling away, a possibility opening up. Samuel broke the moment with a hungry cry. As Tabitha moved to feed him, Thomas stood. "I need to check the north pasture," he said. "Make sure they didn't cause any damage while they were looking for their non-existent cattle." "Be careful," Tabitha called after him. He paused at the door, looking back at her with a small smile. "Always am." After he left, Tabitha sat feeding Samuel and thinking about the confrontation with Radcliffe's men. She couldn't shake the feeling that they wouldn't give up so easily. If Radcliffe wanted Thomas's land, he would find another way to pressure him. Her thoughts turned to Boston, to her father's business dealings. She had grown up listening to him discuss strategies, negotiations, and occasionally the less savory tactics employed by his competitors. One lesson had stuck with her. In any conflict, information was power. What did she know about James Radcliffe? Very little. But information could be gathered, and Tabitha was nothing if not resourceful. When Pedro returned, she asked him to stay at the cabin while she took a walk to clear her head. He agreed readily, clearly concerned for her after the encounter with Radcliffe's men. Instead of walking aimlessly, Tabitha headed with purpose toward the small creek that ran through the property. Following it upstream, she soon came to the spring Thomas had mentioned, a clear pool of water bubbling up from underground, feeding the creek that eventually joined with others to form Willow Creek. She could see why it was valuable. In this dry land, a reliable water source was worth more than gold. And if this spring was on Thomas's property, while the rest of the creek ran through Radcliffe's land. Tabitha followed the creek further, crossing into what must be Radcliffe's property based on Thomas's descriptions. She hadn't planned to go so far, but something drove her, on curiosity, perhaps, or a desire to understand the conflict better. After about 15 minutes of walking, she saw it, a half-built dam, just as Curtis had mentioned. Work had clearly stopped some time ago, with tools and materials left abandoned. Thomas must have succeeded in stopping the project somehow. As she turned to head back, movement caught her eye. A man on horseback, watching her from a rise about 100 yards away. Even at that distance, she recognized Curtis's lanky form. He raised a hand in mock salute, then turned his horse and disappeared over the ridge. Tabitha hurried back to the ranch, her mind racing. Curtis had been watching her, which meant Radcliffe's men were still in the area, perhaps monitoring the ranch. The thought sent a chill through her. When she returned, she found Thomas and Pedro in heated conversation. They fell silent as she entered. "What is it?" she asked. "What's happened?" Thomas looked grim. "The fence on the north pasture has been cut, and someone left this." He held up a piece of paper. Tabitha took it. A crude drawing of a cabin with flames rising from it. No words, none needed. The message was clear. "Radcliffe," she said. Thomas nodded. "He's escalating. Pedro and I will take turns keeping watch tonight." "I saw Curtis," Tabitha admitted. "On my walk, he was watching me from Radcliffe's land." Thomas's expression darkened. "You shouldn't have gone so far alone." "I needed to understand what we're facing," she replied steadily. "And now I do." "This is about water rights, isn't it? The spring feeds the creek that Radcliffe wants to dam. Yes, Thomas confirmed. If he controls the spring, he controls the water for half the valley. He could charge whatever he wants, drive smaller ranchers out. And you stopped him from building the dam. I filed a complaint with the territorial government. Turns out even out here there are laws about water access. A small, grim smile touched Thomas's lips. Radcliffe wasn't pleased. Tabitha thought for a moment. If it's a legal matter, couldn't the sheriff help? Thomas and Pedro exchanged glances. Sheriff Davis is a good man, Thomas said carefully, but he's one man against Radcliffe's money and influence. He'll uphold the law if it comes to that, but he can't provide round-the-clock protection. So we protect ourselves, Tabitha said firmly. Thomas's eyebrows rose at her use of we, but he nodded. For now, yes. I've sent word to some friends who might help. Until then, we stay alert. That night, after Pedro had taken the first watch and Thomas was preparing to relieve him at midnight, Tabitha found herself unable to sleep. Every sound from outside, the wind in the trees, an owl's cry, the distant howl of a coyote had her sitting up in bed, heart pounding. Finally, she rose, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and went to check on Samuel. The baby slept peacefully, untroubled by the adult concerns that plagued his mother. Tabitha touched his cheek gently, drawing strength from his innocent presence. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Tabitha," Thomas's voice, low and concerned. "Are you all right?" She opened the door to find him standing there, a rifle in one hand, his expression worried. "I heard movement," he explained. "Wanted to make sure you were safe." "Just restless," she said. "Too much on my mind." Thomas glanced at the sleeping Samuel, then back at Tabitha. "He's a good sleeper." "Yes," she agreed, smiling despite her anxiety. "Thank heaven for small mercies." They stood in silence for a moment, then Thomas spoke. "I'm sorry about all this. You came here for safety, and now—" "Don't apologize," Tabitha interrupted. "This is your home and you're defending it. There's nothing wrong in that. Still, you and Samuel deserve better than to be caught in the middle of my fight with Radcliffe." Tabitha stepped closer to him, emboldened by the darkness and the strange intimacy of the moment. "It's our fight now. I meant what I said earlier. This is our home too." In the dim light from the oil lamp, she saw Thomas swallow hard. "Tabitha," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I don't have the right to ask you to stay, not with things as they are." "You're not asking," she replied softly. "I'm choosing." His free hand rose, hovering near her face as if he wanted to touch her but wasn't sure he should. "Why?" he whispered. "You could take Samuel and go anywhere, start fresh somewhere safe." "Because here is where I want to be," Tabitha said simply. "With you." The confession hung in the air between them, a leap of faith Tabitha hadn't planned to make but couldn't bring herself to regret. Thomas's hand finally made contact, his calloused fingers brushing her cheek with exquisite gentleness. "I've been alone a long time," he said, his voice barely audible. "Told myself it was better that way, safer. Then you and Samuel came along, and suddenly this place felt like it was missing something all along." "We felt the same," Tabitha admitted, "like we'd found a place we belonged after so much wandering." Thomas's eyes searched hers, seeking confirmation of what he'd heard. Tabitha met his gaze steadily, letting him see the truth of her feelings, the affection that had grown into something deeper over the weeks they'd shared his home. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Thomas leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning at first, then deepening as Tabitha responded, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. When they parted, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I should go relieve Pedro," he murmured reluctantly. Tabitha nodded, though she was loath to see him leave. "Be careful," he smiled, touching her cheek once more. "I have more reason than ever to be careful now, After he left, Tabitha returned to her bed, but sleep remained elusive. Her lips tingled from Thomas's kiss, and her mind swirled with conflicting emotions: joy at the acknowledgement of feelings that had been building between them, fear for what Radcliffe might do, and uncertainty about the future. But beneath it all ran a current of determination. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The next morning brought a surprise visitor, Sheriff Davis, riding up to the cabin just after breakfast. His expression was grave as he dismounted. "Tom," he greeted Thomas, who had come out to meet him. "Miss Fletcher." "Sheriff," Thomas replied. "What brings you out this way?" "Bad news, I'm afraid. Radcliffe's men are claiming you stole cattle. They've got a witness, one of their own ranch hands, of course, who says he saw your brand on cattle with Radcliffe's brand underneath." Thomas's face hardened. "That's a lie." "I know it," the sheriff agreed. "But Radcliffe's pushing for me to make an arrest. Says he'll take it to the territorial judge if I don't." "So arrest me," Thomas said flatly. "Not planning to," Sheriff Davis replied. "But I thought you should know what's coming." "Radcliffe's not the type to give up easily." "We know," Tabitha said, stepping forward. "His men were here yesterday making threats." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "Threats? What kind of threats?" Thomas showed him the drawing of the burning cabin. Sheriff Davis studied it, his expression darkening. "This is crossing a line," he said, "threatening a woman and child." "So you'll help us?" Tabitha asked hopefully. The sheriff sighed. "I'll do what I can, can't promise much." "Radcliffe's got the judge in his pocket and most of the town council too. But threatening arson, that gives me something to work with." "Thank you," Thomas said. Sheriff Davis nodded. "In the meantime, watch your backs. And Tom," he hesitated, "if I were you, I'd consider Radcliffe's offer. He's not going to stop until he gets what he wants." "What offer?" Tabitha asked, looking between the two men. Thomas's jaw tightened. "He offered to buy my land at half what it's worth." "Sometimes half is better than nothing," the sheriff said quietly. "Especially when you've got others to think about now." He glanced meaningfully at Tabitha. After the sheriff left, Tabitha turned to Thomas. "You never mentioned Radcliffe wanted to buy your land." "Because I'm not selling," Thomas replied firmly. "This land is all I have. All I've worked for since the war." "I understand that," Tabitha said gently. "But the sheriff's right about one thing, it's not just about you anymore." Thomas looked at her, his expression softening. "I know, that's why I can't give in. If I sell to Radcliffe, what kind of future could I offer you and Samuel? A man with nothing to his name but the clothes on his back." The question hung in the air, laden with implications neither of them was quite ready to voice. But before Tabitha could respond, Pedro appeared from the barn, a worried expression on his face. "Riders coming," he said. "Many of them." Thomas grabbed his rifle and moved to the front of the cabin. Tabitha followed, her heart pounding. In the distance, a cloud of dust signaled the approach of several horsemen. "Get inside," Thomas told her. "Take Samuel and stay away from the windows." "What are you going to do?" Tabitha asked, fear gripping her. "Talk first," Thomas replied grimly. "Shoot if I have to." Tabitha hesitated, then hurried inside to get Samuel from his cradle. The baby was awake, gurgling happily, unaware of the danger approaching. She held him close, peering cautiously from the window. 6 riders approached the cabin, Curtis in the lead. Beside him rode a distinguished-looking older man with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard, James Radcliffe himself, Tabitha guessed. The other 4 were clearly hired guns, their hands hovering near their holsters. Thomas and Pedro stood their ground in front of the cabin, rifles ready but not aimed at the approaching riders. "Everett," Radcliffe called as they drew near. "Time for a proper chat." "Nothing to chat about, Radcliffe," Thomas replied. "Unless you've come to apologize for your men trespassing and making threats. Radcliffe laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Still the same stubborn fool. I've made you a fair offer for this worthless patch of dirt." "Fair? Half the market value isn't fair." "It's fair when the alternative is getting nothing at all." Radcliffe gestured expansively. "Look around you, Everett. You're outnumbered. The sheriff can't help you. The judge is a personal friend of mine. You're fighting a losing battle." "Maybe," Thomas acknowledged. "But it's my battle to fight." Radcliffe's expression hardened. "Is it worth dying for? Worth putting that woman and her bastard in danger?" Thomas's rifle came up at that, pointing directly at Radcliffe. "Watch your mouth," he growled. Tension crackled in the air. Tabitha held her breath. Samuel clutched to her chest. This could end very badly, very quickly. Then, from the direction of town, another cloud of dust appeared, more riders approaching. "Looks like we have more company," Radcliffe observed, glancing over his shoulder. As the new riders drew closer, Tabitha recognized Sheriff Davis at the front of a group of about 10 men, townspeople by the look of them, armed but not professional gunmen. "What's going on here, Radcliffe?" the sheriff called as they approached. "Just having a conversation with a stubborn neighbor," Radcliffe replied smoothly. "Seems like an awful lot of firepower for a conversation." Sheriff Davis dismounted, walking to stand beside Thomas. "These men behind me. They're concerned citizens of Deming who don't appreciate threats being made against women and children." Murmurs of agreement came from the townsmen. Tabitha recognized some of them, the blacksmith, the livery stable owner, Dr. Wilson, among them. "I've made no threats," Radcliffe protested. The sheriff held up the drawing of the burning cabin. "This says otherwise, and threatening arson is a serious offense in this territory." Radcliffe's confident expression faltered slightly. He hadn't expected resistance from the town. "Furthermore," Sheriff Davis continued, "I've received a telegram from the territorial governor's office. Seems they're very interested in water rights disputes in this area. Something about ensuring fair access for all ranchers, not just the ones with the deepest pockets." Now Radcliffe looked genuinely concerned. "The governor has no jurisdiction." "Actually, he does," the sheriff interrupted. "And he's sending a representative next week to investigate complaints. Might want to rethink your strategy, Radcliffe." A tense silence fell. Radcliffe's men looked to him for direction, hands still near their weapons. Finally, Radcliffe forced a laugh. "Well played, Everett. Didn't think you had these kinds of connections." He turned to Sheriff Davis. "This isn't over. The law may delay things, but it won't stop progress." "Maybe not," the sheriff agreed. "But it will ensure that progress follows the rules. Now I suggest you and your men head back to your ranch before this friendly conversation turns into something else." Radcliffe stared at Thomas for a long moment, then turned his horse. "Let's go, boys. Mr. Everett needs time to reconsider my generous offer." As Radcliffe and his men rode away, the tension drained from the air. Thomas lowered his rifle, exchanging a look of relief with Pedro. Tabitha rushed out of the cabin, Samuel in her arms. "Sheriff Davis, thank you." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Don't thank me. Thank Dr. Wilson here. He's the one who gathered these men when he heard what Radcliffe was planning." Tabitha turned to the doctor in surprise. "Dr. Wilson," the older man smiled sheepishly. "Least I could do, Miss Fletcher. That horse Tom gave me for your care. Won first prize at the territorial fair last month. Best quarter horse anyone's seen in these parts." Thomas looked equally surprised. "You rounded up these men to help us." "Town takes care of its own," Dr. Wilson said simply. "And like it or not, you and Miss Fletcher are part of Deming now." The other townsmen nodded in agreement. Tabitha felt tears spring to her eyes at this unexpected show of solidarity. "We'll keep an eye on Radcliffe," Sheriff Davis assured them. And with the governor's office involved, he'll have to tread carefully. But stay alert. Men like him don't give up easily. After the sheriff and townsmen departed, promising to check in regularly, Thomas, Tabitha, and Pedro stood in the yard, still processing what had happened. "I don't understand," Tabitha said. "I thought the town disapproved of me being here, of our arrangement." Thomas shook his head, looking as puzzled as she felt. "So did I," Pedro chuckled, breaking the tension. "People talk, but when trouble comes they remember who is good neighbor. Who helped when Baker's barn burned, who brought medicine when Wilson's wife was sick." He clapped Thomas on the shoulder. "They remember." Tabitha studied Thomas's face, seeing a new understanding dawn there. He had thought himself isolated, apart from the town. But in his own quiet way, through small acts of kindness, he had built connections stronger than he knew. That evening, after Pedro had gone to his own small cabin on the far side of the property, Tabitha and Thomas sat on the porch watching the sunset. Samuel slept peacefully inside, exhausted from the excitement of the day. "You really think it's over?" Tabitha asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Thomas considered the question. "With Radcliffe? No, he'll find another way to pressure me. But he'll be more careful now, with the governor's office involved and the town watching." "What will you do?" "Stand my ground," Thomas replied simply. "Fight if I have to, but legally through proper channels." Tabitha nodded, understanding his determination. The land meant everything to him. It was his future, his legacy. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," Thomas said after another pause. "About Samuel's father." Tabitha tensed. This was a conversation she'd been both expecting and dreading. "You don't have to tell me," Thomas added quickly. "It's not my place to pry." "No, you should know," Tabitha said, taking a deep breath. "His name was William Blackburn, son of a prominent banker in Boston. We were courting secretly because his family wouldn't have approved of me. When I told him I was with child, he denied responsibility and disappeared." The words came out flat, emotionless, a recitation of facts rather than the painful betrayal it had been. "And your family disowned me. My father was concerned about his business reputation. My mother followed his lead, as she always did." Tabitha looked out at the darkening landscape. "I took what money I had saved and came west. I thought I could start fresh where no one knew me." Thomas was silent for a long moment, processing her story. "He was a fool," he finally said. Tabitha looked at him in surprise. "William, yes, and your father too." Thomas turned to face her fully. "They threw away the most precious thing a man could have, family." The simple statement, delivered with such conviction, brought tears to Tabitha's eyes. Not everyone sees it that way. "Then they're blind," Thomas said firmly. "Family love, that's what matters, not reputation or business connections." "Is that why you helped us that night?" Tabitha asked. "Because of your mother," Thomas nodded slowly. "Partly, but also because." He hesitated, searching for words. "Because when I saw you there, so determined even in your pain, something in me recognized something in you. A kindred spirit, maybe." "I felt it too," Tabitha admitted. "Even then, hurting and afraid, I felt safe with you." Thomas reached for her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "Tabitha, I'm not a man of many words, never have been, but these past weeks, having you and Samuel here." He paused, struggling to express himself. "It's like finding something I didn't know was missing." Tabitha squeezed his hand encouragingly. "For us too." "I can't offer much," Thomas continued. "Just this land, this home, a life that won't be easy but could be good if you wanted to stay. Permanently." The question hung in the air between them, not quite spoken but clear nonetheless. Tabitha's heart hammered in her chest. This was what she'd been afraid to hope for, a chance at a new beginning, not just for herself but for Samuel too. "A family. Are you asking me to marry you, Thomas Everett?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. A smile touched his lips, gentle and warm in the fading light. "I reckon I am, Tabitha Fletcher, if you'll have me." Tabitha thought of the journey that had brought her here, the pain, the fear, the uncertainty. And then she thought of the past weeks. Thomas cradling Samuel, reading poetry by firelight, standing firm against threats to protect what was his. What could be theirs? "Yes," she said simply. "I will." Thomas's smile broadened, a rare, full smile that transformed his face. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss full of promise and quiet joy. When they parted, he kept hold of her hand as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. "We should wait a bit," Tabitha said practically. "Let the situation with Radcliffe settle, give people time to adjust to the idea." Thomas nodded, though a flicker of impatience crossed his face. "How long?" Tabitha laughed at his directness. "A month. That seems respectable." "A month," Thomas agreed. "Not a day more." They sat together as darkness fell completely, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast New Mexico sky. Tabitha felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time, perhaps ever. This was home. This was where she belonged. 1 year later, the small ranch had transformed. A new room had been added to the cabin for Samuel, who was now walking and getting into everything. The garden had expanded under Tabitha's care, producing vegetables for their table and enough extra to sell in town. Thomas's cattle herd had grown slightly, and he'd added a few milk cows at Tabitha's suggestion. The conflict with Radcliffe had reached an uneasy truce. The territorial governor's representative had sided with the small ranchers, establishing clear water rights that prevented Radcliffe from damming the creek. He'd made one more offer to buy Thomas's land, this time at full market value, but had accepted Thomas's refusal with grudging respect. On a warm summer evening, Thomas and Tabitha sat on their expanded porch, watching Samuel chase fireflies in the yard. Thomas held their second child, a 3-month-old daughter named Margaret, who slept peacefully in her father's arms. "Did you ever imagine this?" Tabitha asked, gesturing to the domestic scene before them. "When you gave up Storm for me that night," Thomas smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "Not specifically this, but I knew there was something special about you even then. Special enough to give up your prized horse." "Best trade I ever made," Thomas replied without hesitation. "Storm was a fine horse, but he brought me something far more valuable." "What's that?" Tabitha asked, though she knew the answer. Thomas looked at the sleeping baby in his arms, at Samuel playing in the yard, and finally at Tabitha, his eyes full of love. "Everything that matters," he said simply. "Everything that matters." As the sun set over their small corner of New Mexico territory, Tabitha reflected on the journey that had brought them here, a desperate moment, an act of kindness, and the love that had grown from both. She had come west seeking escape, and had found home instead, in the most unexpected of places. The heart of a quiet rancher who had given up his prized possession for a woman in need, never imagining that in doing so he would gain a family, and she would find her place in the world. Their story would continue, with challenges and joys alike. But whatever came, they would face it together, on this land that had witnessed their beginning, and would nurture their future, a future built on a foundation of sacrifice, kindness, and the enduring power of love.